Hello, Alenka.
Hello.
So, doing PhD with you was the greatest wonder of my life, the miracle, and this interview is like extension of this part of my life, and I'm really grateful that you agreed to.
I'm grateful for this invitation, particularly in these extraordinary circumstances in which we are filming this, especially for you. I mean, this is something out of the ordinary, very much.
Miracle in many ways. I wanted to ask you about the human animal, the humans as such. You rely on Nietzsche, who claims that humans are sick, crippled animals. What is the difference between humans in psychoanalytic view, in your own view, and the rest of the nature, other animals?
Yeah, I mean, this is obviously a very complicated and complex question, which has been tackled with in many different ways already. So I'm kind of trying to find my way of articulating this. And of course, even if you ask the question this way, what is the difference between human animals and other kind of animals, you already operate with some notion of the animal. And this is precisely what I'm trying to kind of not really disentangle, but put apart a little bit. So what do we say when we say animal, or when we say that some humans behave like animals? Here we can clearly see, and this point has already been made by others, that usually what we refer to as this kind of animal, bestial behavior of human beings is not something that we ever see in animals. Animals usually don't behave in this way. It's a kind of particularly human way to behave like a beast, so to say. So there is this kind of ambiguity at work already there. And then, of course, you have this philosophical tradition of seeing human animal as a kind of, let's say, this kind of more organic part of human beings, like natural part, the part with which they belong to some kind of nature, where again the whole notion of the nature remains not really touched in this. And then there is something extra spiritual going on with humans, which then makes all the difference, and which then qualifies this whatever human animal specificity as animals that have something more than just this animal part, which again, as I said, is a kind of a difficult notion to sustain, because obviously you can ask, where does this more come from? Where does it simply come, okay, from heaven? This is certainly one way that was traditionally looked at. I mean, this question was traditionally looked at, but then if you kind of follow some more, let's say, materialist tradition, then obviously this becomes a serious question. So where does this more come from? And so in the midst of all this questioning, I was kind of struck by this idea of Nietzsche, which for me resonated in a certain specific way. I'm not even saying that Nietzsche meant it in this way, but it resonated for me with some things that I take from Lacan and Freud, where Nietzsche said that actually the problem with the humans or human animals is that they are, this is how I read it, that they are not even fully animals, not that they are more than animals, but that if we take this image of an animal as something more or less consistent with, again, is a problem in itself, then the problem with humans is that there is a certain thing that lacks already on that level. So he uses, I think the terms are that it's half, I forgot the term. It was halbes. I think it was halbes is the way he describes the, let's say, human creature. And what was interesting for me in this move is that it doesn't then take, I mean, I read it like this, that this specific human, whatever superstructure that is developed in the case of human beings is developed precisely at the point of this lack, at the point of this half that is missing, not as a way of kind of filling it in, but precisely as building with this nothing, as building with this negativity, as repeating this negativity, or circling around this negativity, as making something out of this negativity itself. And then this could be a way of describing, defining whatever human beings, that they make of this something that they kind of allegedly lack in relationship to an animal, something not more in any moral sense, but precisely some kind of a surplus that introduces an important difference in the way how we function. So this might sound a little bit abstract, because, but so if you have more concrete way of, I mean, some questions.
It's both that in Lacan and in Nietzsche, we can find the interpretation of humans as lacking something, as not being fully animals, not adapted, disadapted, maladapted animals. But at the same time, this suggests that there is this whole nature, that there is some harmonious nature behind it. And you kind of overthrow this idea and this reading of Lacan, claiming that there is no complete nature, that humans are opposite to this lack.
Yeah, first I will just one additional point which I really want to emphasize, because I am kind of often made to repeat it because people still associate this Freudian Lacanian theory with, yeah, precisely this notion, which I also use a lot, lack, something is lacking in humans. But what I want to emphasize precisely already with the argument that I made before is that lack and surplus are part of the same topology here. It is not simply lack. It is there. I think the only way we could put it like this, the only way you can, from the psychoanalytic perspective, you can deduce this kind of radical negativity or minus that I'm talking about is precisely by analyzing this surplus enjoyment, whatever excessive part of this. So this alarms us, alerts us to something, this kind of excessive surplus thing, and it is by means of analyzing how it gets constituted, what does it represent, that we can kind of get to this original lack or whatever, and not the other way. So for me, it's important to stress that there are this that there is this compound where the only thing you don't have here is some kind of neutrality, some kind of zero level. You have a minus and you have a surplus, and they work together. For me, this is the kind of essential topological figure of the drive in psychoanalysis. It's always the negativity and the surplus that can only emerge at the place of this negativity and keeps emerging at the place of this negativity. Okay, this is just to kind of perhaps put in brackets a little bit this idea that this is just about negativity. It is also about this surplus and questioning how it operates and what it means, what it indicates. But yes, I mean, what I then, to return to your question, what I then tried to do with this whole idea of Nietzsche and Lacan is to say that perhaps human animals are precisely the proof that animal with capital A does not exist, and that this nature is in itself something inconsistent and incoherent, and that it never really works as a kind of foolproof, also let's say contingency proof apparatus that would be kind of functioning more or less harmoniously or lawfully in itself, and then there are these disruptions introduced by humans and so on. So the idea here is precisely that nature in this sense does not exist, that animal in this sense does not exist, and that the humans are a kind of a singular articulation or kind of a point when this inconsistency in nature obtains a being of its own, so to say, which is a human being is the very carrier or the very kind of point of existence of the inconsistency in nature. So it doesn't simply come humans as something that interrupts nature, that kind of throws it out of its rails, but I articulate this more in terms of something that happens to nature and that obtains this I mean, singular, not singular existence as testifying, articulating, speaking about the very inconsistency of nature. So here, human beings are the point where nature speaks about its own inconsistency.
Mm-hmm. Technically, nature that doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, I think this would be the point, that nature is a kind of, very often it's a kind of phantasmatic projection. I mean, I'm not saying that there is no real or something like this, but real is precisely not what this idea of nature suggests. Some kind of a, I mean, it's chaotic. It's not necessarily chaotic, but there is nothing particularly. I mean, yeah, it's just nature, so to say, and it's to impute it some kind of intention, even if it's just, you know, this kind of perfect organization, everything's kind of turns out to be some kind of equilibrium at the end, and so on and so on. These are so many projections into this idea of nature from which we were kind of expelled, which to some extent repeat the story of the expulsion from Eden. You know, you were and I think there is a certain narrative that is repeating here, even if it's not in any kind of religious terms, but still it repeats this kind of element of as being thrown from this kind of homeostatic or whatever organic totality, and then we suffer because of this. And I try to kind of, undermine this perspective.
So this is quite pessimistic reading, right? Because there is no hope for harmony that was before that we need to reestablish, or harmony that we can constitute, the absence of suffering, just same lack, this fundamental negativity that produces something all the way, and it will never get any better.
Yeah, here I mean, it's certainly not a very optimistic picture, but I don't think that one could jump so quickly from this question or this notion of the nature that does not exist to the question that this means that no harmony is possible, or there is no stabilization of certain, let's say, social ties or natural ties or whatever. I think these are two very different questions. And if you just look now, if you kind of refocus on human history, if you look at the human history, I don't see, I mean, you can see immediately how the worst things that happened in history, or the worst crimes, or the worst things, were very often conducted precisely in the name of harmony, of establishing some kind of a lost harmony. So for me, the undermining of this idea of the lost harmony is precisely a way which opens a path of not falling into this cycle of harmony that is never there, and then we kind of, we are just victims or hostages of this kind of aggressive, I mean, the non-existence of harmony does not mean directly war, aggression. These are very much secondary formations, I would say, socially mediated and constructed in so many ways that have nothing to do with this idea whether there is some kind of a innate principle of harmony in nature. I think it's really, once you get rid of this principle, that the path opens for searching of ways in which, I mean, harmony is perhaps not the best word, but something like it, or something in the sense of communal life that would be sustainable and not only this, also kind of to some extent at least joyful or interesting or worth living could be thought about. So I would not say that this ontological, let's say, perspective that nature in this sense does not exist leads to kind of simply pessimistic view that that all human or whatever natural ties are just necessarily ridden by some kind of chaotic destructiveness. I don't think this is the direct implication, but obviously a lot of things would need to be said or developed also conceptually to go to build something, let's say, based on this kind of ontology. But still, I don't know if this answers your question a little bit, or you have insisted on it.
Paradoxically, when humans are trying to reestablish some goodness, this is how they practice normally evil, by imposing some idea of harmony.
Yeah, I mean, you had this kind of a good example of this. I mean, one of the examples is, if you look at how, let's say, if we take the question of sexual discrimination, sexual difference, and so on, that traditionally women have been oppressed precisely in the name of some harmonic function, supposedly harmonic functioning, or should be harmonic functioning of the couple. So the idea of whether yin yang or whatever positivity activity, there was this idea of a wholeness of a harmonic functioning. And of course, as by coincidence, it was always women, or almost always women, that were expected to be like this or like that, to help men this harmonious whatever thing that never really existed as such. And so they were expected to behave in this way or in this, to vote or not to. I mean, so it's a lot of things, as I said, have been done and put forward precisely in the name of the supposed harmonic relationship, which itself has this very strong ideological connotation to it, ideological in the sense precisely of screening off certain antagonisms with this forceful image, or enforcing people to comply with it, rather than kind of struggling with this antagonism, or trying to remake them in some, redress them in some other way. So this is what basically I meant, that lots of things, not that people were trying to be happy, but there were this kind of obsessive idea also that of this kind of images of harmonious totalities and so on, that did in fact introduce a lot of evil in the world.
I was, when I was studying with you, I saw that your idea, because you provide one of the best criticisms of toxic positivity, what is called this ideal of psychology of a healthy, happy human that is imposed as the hero of our time. And I thought it's weird, your criticism before, because what is wrong with this idealizing happy humans? And then I came to, after some thinking, I came to agree with you, and not only it became the most important part of my research. So what do you think now is wrong with the positive psychology or pop psychology and self-help? Are they, how are they damaging, and how are they getting more damaging than before?
Yeah, I think, I mean, what I find kind of interesting, and also to some extent fun, even comical, about this move to positive psychology, whatever, is that there is this idea, this kind of materialist, interesting materialist idea, that it's enough to pretend to be happy, to make, to go through the motions of happiness, and to think of yourself as happy for the happiness to actually take place. I mean, there is this kind of, Pascalian, Artiserian, almost thesis that, from this kind of, if you are not religious, it's enough to pray and to say the prayers and to go through all the rituals, and with time the faith will come. So it's not that it comes from the inside, it comes from the outside, it comes from this whatever symbolic and other rituals that we engage into, and the most intimate faith can actually be a result of this kind of external action following some patterns that we don't really relate to, but then at some point they really become our intimate faith. And I detect something similar here sometimes in this way in which the idea of if you just think positively when something happens, you should, I mean, I don't know this in any detail, but from what I see here and there are these kind of techniques also of how you kind of get out of this negative thinking and just wrap yourself into positive thinking. And then from the miracle of this whatever external intervention, you'll soon grow kind of happy in yourself. So this is a kind of idea which has a certain comical, and by comical I don't simply mean bad or but a ring to it, which is its own, I don't know, it kind of discloses the truth also of a certain process and Einstellung, a kind of that sees itself as coming from the inside, as being extremely personal and so on. We are all supposed to be happy in more or less the same way, even though the particularities are allowed and so on. But there is, of course, another problem with this, and this is, I think, what you referred to, what I was working on when we met, which is this the problem with the idea of the happiness. Because what is happiness? I mean, this is very interesting. You know that Freud first wanted to the title that he intended for das Unbehagen in der Kultur, the discontent in civilization, was das Unglück in der Kultur, the unhappiness. But of course, here the German term already reminds us a little bit more of this dimension of happiness as luck. It happens, but it's kind of Glück. It's like it happens, it's an accident, it is a fortuna, it's something happens, and it does not refer to any kind of state. It is constructed about something that surprisingly, by coincidence, happens and makes us happy. Whereas this idea of happiness as a kind of more or less permanent harmonic state, because this is basically what it's all about. It's this harmony that just goes on and it's never interrupted, and we are more or less satisfied, or of permanent excessive happiness, of something happy, of experiencing some kind of excitement all the time. When this is combined about this, let's say, social imperative of being happy, because it is one thing is that we strive for some kind of happiness. We prefer to feel happy than unhappy, which also is not at all true. This is what one of the fundamental psychoanalytic discoveries were about, that it's simply not true that all we want is to be happy. The whole world would probably look otherwise. But it's also that the kind of the moment that happiness becomes a kind of social imperative, this introduces a lot of different dimensions into the landscape. Because this could mean it becomes the element of a proof that we are successful, that we are like managing ourselves and our relationship, that we a certain proof of success in life, so to say. Not to be a failure is to happiness should testify to this. People who are unhappy, it seemed from this kind of ideological equation, were actually somehow flawed. There was something pathological with them, and they were failures, basically. If you are not happy, it's because you are a failure. So there is this kind of a strong additional guilt that comes with this positive incitement of positive feelings as its flip side. So then there is also this kind of superego, to use the psychoanalytic term, superego imperative to be happy, which usually consumes the one who carries it. I mean, it's so it is not, it becomes a kind of almost a kind of a deadly trap to follow this kind of superego, where whatever, even if you feel very happy, the superego tells you that this is not enough. You should feel more happy. This is okay. This is, you achieve this. But so there is this more and more and more, and of course, never enough, which constitutes a certain vicious circle of utter unhappiness in the name of, if you want, happiness. So there are lots of things and facets of this idea of happiness as any kind of state. So I don't know, when Freud says, for instance, he has this idea that, okay, happiness can be perhaps understood as some kind of this pleasure principle, if it existed, program, but he said actually this program is kind of also, it seems, programmed to fail. It does not, it's difficult to realize, but this does not mean that so we are just unhappy, but that it is not, there is no pre-established formula that we could follow. We invite, yeah, our own ways of happiness, or of, what is this famous line, every family is happy in the same way, but unhappy in its own way. So, but there is this, so anyway, so it's not simply the happiness itself can be used in a very problematic way as a kind of, as I think I termed it back then, biomorality, that you can kind of, on the basis of it, are you feeling happy or not, you can establish a kind of short circuit between what you morally are and this feeling of happiness or unhappiness.
And also, my favorite concept is the concept of a death drive, and in completely weird interpretation. And you provide some very nice interpretation of what is death drive. Precisely, you claim that it's humans are kind of beyond the pleasure principle already, because it's superego that wants pleasure, but something more primordial than superego is the death drive as the drive as such, Lacanian interpretation. So it's the pure maybe negativity that just repeats itself, and maybe Deleuzean interpretation that death drive as a transcendental principle, and life drive or is just implementation of. So how would you define death drive? What is your favorite interpretation?
Yeah, I mean, I've been working on this a lot, yeah, as you say, and also trying to, this is a more, let's say, Lacanian move than is a Freudian move, because Freud, in most cases, although he oscillates a lot, but he kind of finally subscribes to this dualism of the drives, to put it like this, like death drive and life drive, or eros and thanatos, and then stage, but this is staged as a kind of eternal struggle between good and evil, or between destruction and a kind of generation, or solidarity, or whatever, and then the pessimism is situated or is diagnosed on the account of the fact that this struggle between the two is eternal and is will not disappear. But what I mean, also philosophically, I'm trained to be suspicious about this kind of dualistic solutions to certain problem, because they usually mask a certain difficulty more than they resolve it, or there are solutions that are in themselves symptomatic. When you cannot actually conceptualize fully some kind of, let's say, internal contradiction or contradiction aside, you then just cut it in half and stage two elements that are then struggling between themselves, which is a way of, yeah, finding a solution, which I think it's not, this is not for me the best Freud, even though Freud wrote some incredible passages precisely on the question of the dead drive, he introduced this notion, and it's, I think, one of the most radical notions that he introduced. So I'm not kind of here trying to get rid of it, on the contrary, but I think there is something in this notion which is more radical than this duality of the principles, and this is what I tried to kind of stay true to or develop further with this kind of complicated, perhaps philosophical ontology also of the dead drive, or of there only being a dead drive and not a kind of two drives, but this dead drive not being reducible to some kind of will to die, will to aggressiveness. As I briefly said before, these I think are already some secondary phenomena. Dead drive is a kind of ontological presupposition of how a certain negativity coexists with this surplus that is produced at its place, and which is there, for instance, in humans and so on, precisely as something that kind of wakes us up, deranges us from a certain supposedly homeostatic functioning or whatever. So there is this idea that dead drive in itself is not simply the surplus, nor is it simply the negativity, but it's precisely the way how circling around this negativity, repeating it, some, let's say, ontological positivity is created, and that it is precisely created in this way, and not simply as a surplus to something which is there, and then this is more of it. No, it is precisely as the surplus of what is not there. So this is just to return to this image that I was discussing at the beginning. So I think the idea that the dead drive is not, I talked before about this kind of, what does it mean? I mean, if you say that the dead drive is a certain, let's say, whole, not even a minus or not even a negative, there is a certain whole which cannot be simply filled out, or to put it like this, perhaps this, because I'm afraid that perhaps we are kind of, or I'm losing myself in a slightly too abstract arguments, but what I want to say is, if you take this like in social terms, if you say, okay, there is this dead drive, which can lead in different directions, but there is this kind of fundamental antagonism that no amount, it seems, if we talk now in social terms, no amount of social regulation can simply do away with. So I think, so one way of saying this is that, okay, so we have this antagonism, there are two sides or two principles fighting, and this is what is irreducible, that they are both fighting. But what I think could be a more interesting and also politically more interesting way of looking at this, if you say, for instance, also you speak of the social, and you say the social always comes with a problem, and this would be what bottom line of what Freud says in the Zusammenhang in der Kultur. It's kind of comes with the problem, but at the same time, it is one should think of the social as always already responding to this problem of something which is actually constituted in responding to this antagonism. So it is what we call, for instance, social problems are precisely not so many versions of this constitutive and irreducible problem, but are also belong to its solutions. And I don't know, I already at some occasion I use this image. It is, to paint a very simple picture. Say there is a hole in the ground on your path. So you can respond by bridging it or circumventing it or descending into it and climbing up again on the other side. You can respond by filling it in with some stuffing and then or inventing tools to jump across it and so on. Obviously the problem of the whole does not simply disappear with these solutions, but persists, the whole persists precisely through or in what these solutions themselves impose on us, demand from us. For instance, these tools or this walking, going around and so on, what they give us, or what they make possible or what they make impossible, how they also relate to one another. So you could say that the social or human is always a way of reinventing this supposedly irreducible problem. It is not simply a version of it, it is a way of reinventing it in a new way. And I think this, for me, would be a kind of political or social, possible social perspective on this negativity, which is not simply there to say, okay, whatever we try, it will be the same, we will be fighting again, but precisely as, no, we need to reinvent this problem of negativity, not just to kind of collapse back into it and say, okay, now it's aggression. We have to reinvent the negativity in this positive way. And this could be a kind of perhaps political, philosophical political problem.
That's nice. Explanation. I was also wanted to ask, can we say that we are now getting more traumatized and more anxious, and how can we define trauma even in relation to humans? Because trauma is something that we can't feel. Trauma is something accessible to psyche, but at the same time, it allows us to feel traumatized. And anxiety, is this some protection, like psychoanalytic reading, the protection from greater suffering, or is it, what is it?
Yeah, I mean, the whole question of the trauma is, I think, interesting precisely because of what you now very nicely formulated, and what is also my strong conviction. First of all, that the thing with trauma is that in a way, it always falls out of the field of experience. It is not something that we experience, but it's a kind of built in our very possibility to experience something. So of course, there are events that are traumatic and that we kind of experience in the way that they happen to us. But there is a certain outside, a certain externality of trauma that is always there. That what is being traumatically repeated is precisely this outside that is never part of a kind of immediately lived human experience. And this is what makes trauma so traumatic, so to say, for what accounts for it being so traumatic and not simply painful or even, deadly, because there is a difference between what we call trauma and some kind of deadly injury or whatever. One can feel that there is this difference. So it's I think a very interesting way, and also the way how Freud looks at it, with to kind of see, as Reshe formulated it, I mean, based on the reading of Freud, that it is actually outside the experience, and this is what is repeated then with this traumatic repetition and so on. But yeah, the anxiety is another very important concept there in psychoanalysis, where it has a slightly different texture, I mean, conceptually speaking, than in the, let's say, common parlance or in some kind of more other kinds of psychological approaches. Because, I mean, for Lacan, anxiety is above all a sign, a signal of the real. It is the moment of certainty. Anxiety, it's not the same as fear, and it's not about some uncertainty, but it's a kind of moment of unbearable certainty. And this is also why he said at some point that in the analytical treatment, the anxiety would need to be administered in right dosages, because otherwise, I mean, it could be very productive in the sense of kind of helping us work with this real, rather, yeah, than just being overwhelmed, frozen by it. But still, it is not necessarily a negative feeling or something to be dismissed as and prevented at all price, but instead something that one can actually work with in a very interesting way, and that leads something that actually does allows us to get in touch with a certain real. So it's not, and I think this is a very important difference between, I would say, psychoanalysis, both Freudian, Lacanian, and some other ways of psychology, where very often all these supposedly negative affects or whatever are kind of just seen as something that one should get rid of or replace them with something else. But this replacing with something else then often comes with the price of losing, let's say, the very point, the very contact with the real that produces all this suffering. So it's not just, and we are back to this notion that we were discussing before, of so you just through positive thinking or perhaps through medication, you simply kind of disconnect from your from this suffering. And of course one can say, okay, why not? So I disconnect, I feel okay, what's the problem with this? Well, I'm not saying that there is a problem if you look at it philosophically, but also I think humanly, because also the suffering is not always just this, and it's not that I would advocate suffering as a necessary path to whatever, but there is, it's not so simple. One cannot, and you know, already this kind of idea of enjoyment as that could also be absolutely beyond the pleasure principle. This is to say, involve a certain amount of suffering, but not at the same time not filling us with this kind of unnecessarily negative emotions, or kind of even allowing us a kind of surplus joy. And this is also something to consider. So whereas here this kind of collapses back into a kind of structure that does not allow for a lot of actually movement and change and shifting of the elements that are the cause of the suffering to begin with. Because you lose the point, the handles to this, you know. I think this is also what is so important. I mean, why I think psychoanalysis is so important with what it brings also conceptually to this interrogation of how to, we often say how to change things and so on. Okay, first of all, things very often change all by themselves, and we try to kind of hang on and survive in this thing. It's not that we can influence all that much, but at the same time, there are ways of, even though they are not immediately accessible, these kind of things that cause our, now it we say suffering or social struggles and so on, but there are certain handles that we need to find, to detect in the analytical situation, I guess, by listening to what is being said and not by imposing certain pre-established notions in it, but listening what is being said, and within these words find a handle that can help you move something in this structure. And this kind of handles, I guess, very much disappear if you just ride like a tank over all the bad emotions, or treat people with basically pharmaceutics and so on. So this is the unconscious becomes truly closed and inaccessible. It's not, it is our foreclosed, and then we seem to wonder a lot when it returns with a vengeance in all kinds of social explosions, phenomena, and so on. You say, oh, why these, they are so aggressive? No, they are not so aggressive. These are very often, these returns are the result of some explicit strategies aiming to make people just perfectly happy. So everything that is being foreclosed by these strategies, everything that is being pushed away, not taken into consideration, just and then it really does return with a vengeance, both I think on the social scale, on the scale of nature. I mean, to some extent, the climate crisis is precisely this. It is precisely this surplus waste. It is not simply that we are kind of burning down all the resources that we need for our whatever functioning, but while burning them out, we don't burn them without a rest. If we would just burn them down, we would have a crisis of whatever energy and so on, but we would not have the climate change. The climate change is something that actually came to be because of the surplus of the something more that was created, produced while we were burning down all these resources. So there is again this kind of a huge thing that was kind of just cut off, pushed away, and which is now returning with vengeance in the form of a climate change. But then it is also in the scope of humans and in the scope of social functioning that one can see the same mechanism operating.
I also have one more question, almost the last one. I wanted to ask something about the current situation in the world, precisely with Russian aggression. But the problem is I don't even know what to ask, and whether you have any interpretation of it, or even maybe if we should rush into interpretations.
Yeah, I mean, this is a kind of obviously it's an event that took place in a way that not that it was not simply, people were talking about this possibility as impossibility. Now, if we are just starting from the whatever invasion of the Ukraine, but then as often happens in this kind of situation, it still seemed to get everybody by surprise. I mean, I remember hearing things obviously saying, okay, but if ever was the best moment for Putin to do this, this is it now. I mean, I heard this said in some commentaries, international political commentaries, like a few months before this happened and so on. So the idea was there, but then the surprise was there as well. And this is a very definition of, I would say, a certain whatever event or shattering event to which then we have to respond, as you say, in vivo, such as it is, even by asking the right questions and by responding to it in a way which I think is neither to just try to understand all the background. I mean, because one response is just to say, okay, but you cannot just simply condemn this. You need to understand the background and what is going on and so on. Or just this kind of blindly not seeing anything else, but the suffering of people which is induced by this. I think it is very important to see this as something. Okay, I entangled myself too much. I would put it rather like this: instead of following this reflex, which I think it's now very much around everywhere, which is to step back in a way, to regress to some kind of and consolidate on some old principles. For instance, you can hear now, okay, but now we discover that after this supposedly post-Cold War period where we were discussing, I don't know, the rights of this and that, and men were completely emasculated and women were starting to make, I don't know what. We finally are now back to where we should have been. We see now who are men, who are women, who goes to war, who doesn't. I mean, there is this kind of a huge social regression just in terms of now say this is real. Before we were like, we have these petty problems, now this is real, which it's absolutely true, it is very real, but this should kind of make us jump forward to trying to to politically articulate what is going on, and yeah, also take sides which are not necessarily the sides that are being being kind of underlined for us in this way, instead of just falling back to this old Cold War thing. So it's very difficult, I think, now to think this. First of all, I absolutely, I mean, this is absolutely no doubt about. I really think this should be condemned. As I said before, it is not. There are lots of backgrounds, and I'm not saying, but to say that, to paint this picture, yeah, because the Americans did that very often before, now it's the Russians' turn to do it, or what? I mean, precisely, we should get out of this kind of pattern where the only response is the kind of relativizing. Although I do think one needs to have this background in mind, one needs to point out also to certain bad things that are perhaps happening there. This is not, it should not induce a kind of denkverbot on saying anything wrong on also Ukraine side, but this is a terrible and inadmissible thing that happened here. And then we should make full stop, before we go on saying, but nevertheless, you know, it is this and that. So I think, but it should, and it's very difficult. I think this, the way the whole world is reacting now, and basically it just goes into the direction of forgetting every other problems, including, of course, the climate change and so on, but also back in this kind of military discourse, in this discourse of we should put reinforce NATO, we should put much more money in this. We now know that basically defense and safety are the key issues, and we can also reconsolidate around our part of the world. You know, there is this huge, well, how to put it, disaster, human disaster that is being displayed with these arguments that we hear, at least here we hear it a lot, but I think it's the most Europe that differently from the refugees that were coming to Europe before, these are we, this is we, which I mean, I'm more than happy, I'm really extremely, this solidarity and this way of dealing with refugees that is taking place now is taking place. I think this is perfect. But the way how it is cast against the background of this refusal of taking in anybody who supposedly looks slightly differently, or you suppose does not share your values, although these are all these kind of projections, this kind of a difference is also kind of painful. And I don't think any kind of future of Europe can be built on this kind of wall and on this kind of solidarity that closes itself against the other, in what it defines as the other. So in this war kind of really confronts us with all these problems, with all these questions. And I think the right thing to do, or whatever, a very difficult thing to do, is just to struggle against this ideologically predominating discourse of let's go back to good old times where, you know, we know who were we and who was with us and who wasn't, and so on. I think this is very bad, and it will not lead anywhere. It will just, it's again something that helps us not think about certain things, both political and related to other things like climate. I mean, this is also a political question now, but so it's, I don't know, it's really difficult. And as you say, it's very confusing moment, in the sense that things are happening quickly and they're happening in a very bad way. So yeah, how to react to this without any doubt or questions that this is a cause to defend or to kind of argue for, and without falling in all this kind of reactionary militant discourse that is forming around it, and which basically has a very different agenda in mind. I think one can also detect this, how this people very often are already thinking of something very different, and some certain kind of creation of a certain space and certain type of political systems which has nothing to do with what some of these political leaders, they now pretend to be simply this kind of open-hearted solidarity. So, but I think it's solidarity with people, first of all in Ukraine, but then also with people in Russia who are demonstrating, who are fighting this, and who try to do or whatever. I mean, this is really, and this conflict between simply Russia in general and the rest of the world is not a good conflict. I mean, this is a very bad staging of the problem, because it's not the wrong staging of it. And just to cut off people because they have Russian, I mean, it doesn't help, I would say, the Ukraine cause also in the right way. So sorry, I'm babbling around a little bit confused, because these times are confusing, and I don't have any kind of clear line of what is the position, except that unanimously condemn what happened and kind of not hide immediately behind this kind of, but nevertheless, but at the same time try to think Europe and European configuration as not simply part of this divide that it's now being forcefully established or re-established, and which is another version of the fight of civilizations and so on. Sorry.
Thank you. So that was the last question, and I was thinking, it, apart from the situation is very confusing and terrible, and apart from the objectively terrible things that people are killing other people, and people are losing lives, but also there's something good, that something beautiful that survived, the solidarity of Ukrainians and the solidarity of Ukrainians with Europe. And you taught me that even the beautiful things, if you think deeper, it's also have its complication. It's also not completely beautiful, and it's like there is nowhere to hide, there is nowhere to escape anymore into anything good.
No, I think it's, I mean, this notion of solidarity is absolutely crucial. It's also clear that it has, I mean, now it's the situation of war, and it calls for a certain kind of solidarity, which is basically the solidarity also, I mean, if we just limit ourselves to what is literally taking place in Ukraine, what is going on now, and like neighboring on it. But it's also the solidarity, and so they are there. I mean, they are the identification with the national aspect of this is just part of this, because of this concrete situation. What I was saying before, it's that solidarity should also, and above all, be a solidarity with certain principles which are shared more also transnationally. Obviously, it's not simply based, usually it's not based simply on and now a country was attacked, so obviously this is the way it's formulated, but then looking for points of solidarity with people in similar distress in or deal in other countries is something very different than just I don't know, waving this or that flag. So the solidarity, I think it's actually a very, very good things, yeah, which has
So
its
it's
own
a beautiful thing, but
it's
we
a
need to make it even more beautiful.
Yeah, but it is really what is, because very often it's also the question of what is the cost of this solidarity. Sometimes it's just, you know, trying, people just kind of proclaim something on Facebook, and then this is as far as this solidarity goes. I mean, solidarity is also struggle. It's not simply sympathizing with this or that. It is struggle, it is engagement, and it's something that is not limited only to the moments of this kind of flagrant crises as is this one. Because then it's always that very often in this kind of ultimate crises, the solidarity emerges. But then when this crisis either goes on or resolves in half resolves in some way, this solidarity then disappears, because it is it's only related to this kind of reaction to the to this huge event. But then I think there is a solidarity which should be there all the time, and which should be a kind of continuous struggle, and the beauty of this struggle, and not simply the kind of thing that you do from time to time when something explodes here or there, and then you show. I mean, but yeah, it's important and beautiful and complicated. Yeah.
Thank you, Alan. I think we can finish on this important.
Yeah, I think it's. I mean, yeah, more. I spoke more than a lot.
Thank you so much. I hope to see you one day.
Yeah, me too. So
Thank you.
yours. Thank you.
Bye.